Well, good morning and welcome to Grand Rapids, if you haven't been welcome yet, and to the banks of the longest river in the state of Michigan, the Grand River. And we're going to be talking this morning about the Grand River Restoration Project, the vision, how it developed, the nature of the public-private partnership, and the vision of restoring the river to everyone's benefit. And what does that really mean, and what are the real challenges? We have a distinguished panel with us today, and I will briefly introduce them. Before I do so, I wanted to acknowledge our former mayor, George Hartwell, is here. Mayor Hartwell, could you stand? Mayor Hartwell served as 12 years of mayor of Grand Rapids and was one of the early proponents for the vision of restoring the namesake Rapids to Grand Rapids. So when you come back the next time, you won't have to ask the current mayor, where are the rapids? There have been no rapids in Grand Rapids for over 150 years. There are no photographs of the rapids because the 6th Street Dam was built before cameras existed. So it's been a long time to bring back those rapids that were the home of the sturgeon and the home of the Native Americans, the early trading posts, so central to the history and culture of this region, as well as the environment and its economic future. So it is a truly ambitious vision, and we're here today to talk about it and the challenges of making it a reality. I'm going to just very briefly introduce the panelists. They're described in your materials, and I don't want to waste time going over their many achievements. On my immediate left is Mayor Rosalynn Bliss, the mayor of the city of Grand Rapids, long-term city commissioner, long-term activist and leader in so many causes, including river restoration. Next to Mayor Bliss is Chris Muller, who is in commercial real estate. He's a private business leader, and he and his colleague, Chip Richards, I don't know if Chip is here, are the co-founders of Grand Rapids Whitewater, which is the nonprofit organization that's been leading this effort. Next to Chris is Joe Jones, who's president of the Grand Rapids Urban League and served as co-chair of the River Restoration Committee appointed by the Grand Rapids City Commission, and since then has himself become a city commissioner in the city of Grand Rapids. Wendy Ogilvie is with the Grand Valley Metro Council. John Weiss, the leader, John, of the council, is here as well. They are the Metropolitan Planning Organization for West Michigan, but so much more, as you'll hear from Wendy, and they have been absolute key in involving other governmental units in the River Restoration Project. And to Wendy's left is John Green from Founders Brewing. Hopefully you've had a chance to sample their wares, I guess. And in another demonstration of this as a project where the private sector has, since its inception, been in the lead, Founders Brewing was one of, if not the earliest financial supporters and champions of this project, and has continued to this day to be one of the leading donors, one of the leading voices in support of the project under John's leadership. So you can see we have a very diverse panel here today to talk about the project and what it means. How many of you have gone on either the tour or one of the sessions and have heard about the project? Could you just raise your hands? So many of you have heard about it, and we won't spend time today talking about the mechanics of it, other than it's to restore 2.5 miles of the Grand River in downtown Grand Rapids, including the namesake rapids themselves, and involves removing 5 dams and providing, dealing with a federally endangered snuffbox mussel, dealing with issues involving invasive species. So a very complicated project that involves many levels of stakeholders. The Native Americans have been key leaders and involved, and government agencies at all levels The Urban Water Federal Partnership designation was absolutely critical to this project, with a credibility boost at a key time, and bringing the expertise and access for us to many key federal agencies, particularly the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and the Natural Resource Conservation Service, so I want to acknowledge them. I want to begin by posing a question to Mayor Bliss and ask her, as she looks at the future of Grand Rapids in this community, to just say a few things about her vision and the significance of restoring the Grand River to the future of the city and the region.
Thank you, Mark. Delighted to be with you again this morning. I hope you've had a wonderful few days here in Grand Rapids and that you've had a chance to explore our riverfront. This is one of the most important projects I see as my tenure as mayor. It not only will have a tremendous economic impact on our city, and we know that we have a lot of good data that will show the economic impact it will have, but also I see the river restoration as this incredible opportunity to bring together the community. For a long time, the river has been a divider in our city. It's divided the east from the west. And I believe that the thoughtful redevelopment of the river and the river's edges can truly be a connector. It can be a place, the river can be a place that actually brings people together in a lot of meaningful ways, for education, for connecting with their neighbors, for social gatherings, for recreation. And it's this beautiful asset in the heart of our city. And all of you who love nature, I'm sure that you look out there right now with the 5 dams and you think about what it could be and what it should be, and putting it back to its natural form, I believe, is what's best for the next generation and for the future of our city. So I really see this. We had a destination asset study that was done last year looking at the impact of restoring the rapids on the region and on tourism, and the gentleman who was a part of that study kept calling the river restoration a game changer for our city, and I really believe that. I believe it will be a game changer, and as I said, I think it'll have a tremendous impact not just on downtown, but on our entire city and our entire region, which has been great that we've had this partnership with the Metro Council, because this will have a regional impact. It's not just going to impact our city or our neighborhoods, but it really will have a regional impact. And so it's a very exciting project. I see it tied to a lot of our other priorities in the city. And I also think that this will be probably one of the best examples of public-private partnership. So our city is built on public-private partnerships. A lot of the amazing things that you see throughout our city, they happen because of the commitment of the private sector, philanthropic community, and the public sector coming together with a collective vision. And I think this will be one of the most important public-private partnerships that we will accomplish as a city.
Thank you, Mayor Bliss. The mayor mentioned public-private partnerships, and we've often referred to this particular project as a private-public partnership because there has been so much leadership from the business and the private community as champions of this project. And no one embodies that more than Chris Muller, the co-founder of Grand Rapids Whitewater, and he and Chip Richards have been at this for almost a decade, working not only, in Chris's instance, as a private business owner and leader, but as a volunteer champion. And so he really represents extraordinary private sector leadership. So I wanted to ask Chris to tell you a little bit about the origins of the vision for restoring the river and rapids in Grand Rapids Whitewater.
Thanks, Mark. I think what we tried to accomplish was what could be, not what was or what is in the river. One of the best quotes that I have that we've discovered, as Mark said earlier, is that the change happened before it was even photographed. But the quote says, "Before the river was changed by the work of man, the rapids had a nearly uniform descent for about a mile, sufficient to give a decided turbulent and wild appearance to the waters and make a noise that broke the stillness of the forest and echoed in the neighboring hills." And that was a quote by Charles Whitmore. That is not what you think of when you look at the Grand today. And so our goal really is, and has always been, is how do we bring that sentiment back to Grand Rapids to make it grand again? How do we create it to be the focus of our city and the focus of our region? And so as we went through that process, the city with former mayor and current mayor and the city commission and the private community allowed two guys who crafted a great idea over a founder's beer to go off and try to restore a river. And in the early days, there was one round table of people that thought it was a great idea, and now we have a wonderful platform that extends all the way to Washington, D.C. And so I think that's really what we tried to accomplish by letting the river tell us what it needed, letting science prevail, and really crafting with a wonderful team and wonderful support a plan to bring it back, which has benefits for really everyone, because everyone's emotional attachment to a river is personal, and it's not just one user, and it's not just one community, it's not one demographic. It's really for everyone. I had my own personal motivations for doing it, but that does not discount the next person. So I think that's really what we tried to do when we set the vision.
Chris, what surprised you the most? So you started out with this crazy idea of this canoe, kayak, whitewater right in the heart of the city 9-10 years ago, not having been really involved in public policy processes before and efforts like this. As you reflect back, what surprised you the most?
Well, it wasn't supposed to take this long. That was one. But everyone keeps saying we're working very quickly and swiftly through the process of government. I think the other surprise is how much a community can really come together and coalesce around a topic. And then I think the other is there are elements of politics positive, and there are elements of politics which are somewhat negative, and that's been a learning experience for me.
Great, thank you. Joe, the mayor referred to the river as a divide, separating east and west, and historically more economically advantaged peoples on the east side and more disadvantaged, and increasingly over the years people of color on the west side. And so this vision of turning the river into a bridge amongst people and the neighborhoods instead of that divide is one of the more ambitious aspects of this project. From your experience as city commissioner, co-chair of the River Restoration Committee, as president of the Grand Rapids Urban League, how do you see that potential, and what are the challenges of realizing that inclusive approach to a project like this?
Thanks, Mark, and good morning to all of you. I want to thank you for being here on this morning and for having myself and my colleagues here on the panel. And I think the mayor did a wonderful job of framing what the river at one time represented in our city. Historically speaking, this was, on this side of the river, this is where a predominant number of the African American community members lived. And it's my understanding, this is before my time, but it's my understanding that African Americans in particular were told that it would not be a good idea to be on the other side of the river, on the northwest side of town, after dark. And so historically, the river was seen as something as very much, again, as she said, very much a dividing line, and a place in which didn't necessarily bring up warm and fuzzy thoughts for people of color. And when I was approached a couple of years ago to engage in the River Restoration Steering Committee, I was somewhat taken aback because I hadn't necessarily fancied myself as someone who was very much knowledgeable around water and environment. I knew enough to be dangerous, but I also came to the table understanding that my interest didn't necessarily, with regards to recreation and such, I'm not a water guy, right? Mark talked about the canoeing and the boating and such. I grew up in Detroit, and a brother does not know how to swim. I can swim to survive, but I don't do much in the water. However, if you put me on a boat and you give me a stogie, I'm fine. But I digress. And so what interested me the most was there was a need to make sure that there was going to be a very robust and intentional effort to engage historically marginalized communities in our town, in particular African American Latino communities. And that's what pushed my button, was the opportunity to engage and to serve as a co-chair with a very dear friend of mine, a gentleman by the name of Fred Keller, to engage in the work of trying to pull together a table of individuals from various backgrounds and lived experiences and interests, and keep in the forefront the importance of engaging communities of color. Because what I found, especially in the work of the Urban League, is we were tasked through my organization to engage communities of color around the issue of river restoration and the usage of the river. And what I found, the recurring theme was folks felt as if it wasn't theirs, right? Even though it was something that butted up against their respective neighborhoods, they didn't feel as if it was something that belonged to them. And so a couple of weeks ago, I had the opportunity to take part in a press conference that spoke of the cleanup effort that has been done with the Grand River. And I came across a passage that I think spoke volumes, at least to me, and it was an African proverb that said, "Water is wealth." Water is wealth. And so that is something that is very much at the top of my mind as we continue to engage communities of color, and that is, the river is just as much yours as it is anybody else's. And you may engage in activities in the river that you might engage at a different level with different activities, but it's still yours, right? A lot of folks of color who tap into what the river has to offer, it's fishing, right? It's also, taking the kids down to the river and getting wet. But at the end of the day, it belongs to you just as much as it belongs to everyone else. And so I'm super excited about the process and staying engaged and recognizing that we're in a time, in a season right now in our country where voice matters. And so I'm trying to do my best, not just through the work of the Urban League, but also pulling in other community-based organizations, faith-based organizations, to really rally around this idea of hearing the voice of the indigenous, who I like to say, these are the individuals who were there before everybody, right? Before developers came, before everyone else came, who were the ones who were there enjoying the river and recognizing it as a treasure? It was those who were the indigenous, who happened to be, again, people of color. So, thank you.
Thank you, Joe. Wendy, Joe talked about everybody believing it's their river. One of the issues this and so many river projects face is upstream impacts of what people do upstream and downstream. I remember former Illinois Senator Paul Simon said, somewhat tongue-in-cheek at one point, we could have a one-sentence Clean Water Act just requiring every discharger of waste in the river to put that discharge upstream of the drinking water intake, and then that would take care of everything. So this is a 260-mile-long river, 40 miles downstream to the lake. I can't do the math, but a lot of miles upstream. And you've been the leader in the sort of intergovernmental upstream-downstream connections with this project and other initiatives. Could you talk about that and also talk about the Farm Bill grant? I think folks here will be interested to hear about that.
Sure, thanks, Mark. So as you said, the Grand River starts in Jackson, Michigan, 252 miles about upstream as a little bubbling brook that comes out of the ground and travels north and south and winds all its way through cities and ends up in Grand Haven. And some of you got to go to the lakeshore, and I hope if you haven't yet, you do go to the lakeshore. It's a fantastic area. But our watershed, so that's a lot of communities. And one of the challenges is trying to organize around a river that large. So we've kind of divided it into chunks, and we have the Lower Grand, the Middle Grand, who representatives are here, and also the Upper Grand. And this whole, a lot of you are working in watershed management. It's hard to get that excitement. It's hard to get that support behind some of your projects. But when you have a project like this that's been able to really energize people and energize the cities, and especially getting that urban component to it, It's just it's elevated, I feel like it's really elevated our work in watershed management to be able to get people's attention to the river. And so one of the great partnerships that we have, because it's so far away, you know, with Jackson and the Upper Grand, we formed a formal Grand River partnership. And one of the goals of that is to create a Grand River water trail. But when you have 5 dams that are very dangerous in the middle of the city, it's kind of hard to encourage people to get in and do that. So, you know, the mission of our watershed is swimming, fishing, drinking, enjoying the Grand River for everyone, connecting water with life. And that's really what we try to do, is just connect. And I got an opportunity, Canoe Mobile is here this week, and we were able to get 1,000 8th graders of Grand Rapids Public Schools out on, I think the mayor is actually out on one. So the ones that weren't out in the canoes, they were on the land. And so we were doing some activities with them on the land. And I kind of asked them a trick question. I said, are we upstream or downstream? And they weren't sure. They really weren't sure. And it was really fun to discuss with them. Everybody's upstream, but everybody's downstream, and trying to find their place in the watershed. So with a lot of our partners here, we have Plester Creek and a lot of the other watershed partners, we do place-based education. And so it's having our students understand where they are, where is their place in the watershed, which helps them understand just some of these bigger concepts, because there's a lot of focus around water right now. And you talked about water intakes. Most of the people here, we get our drinking water from Lake Michigan. And the intake of that is very near to the outlet of the Grand River. And making that connection of, so what we're putting in the river, eventually we're drinking, really is a new concept for a lot of people to understand that. So Mark wanted me to mention, and we haven't really talked about funding for the project much, but because of the Urban Waters Federal Partnership, our 2 federal co-leads are the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and Natural Resource Conservation Service under USDA. And so as Mark said, we've been very involved with U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service because of endangered species and invasive species. But normally the Natural Resource Conservation Service is a very agriculturally focused program and implementing Farm Bill money. So they weren't ever sure how they could help in this urban project. But they have a program called the Regional Conservation Partnership Program. I don't know if everyone's familiar with that. But it's engaging partners to help them get the Farm Bill money out on the land. And so we got a little creative, and we were able to get one of their practices, which is eligible as in-stream restoration, restoring the habitat in the Grand River from the dam downstream. So we're turning that habitat for the snuffbox mussel and the native fish. And so about $5 million is going to go into the river, and it's only for river. It's not for administration, it's not for public education, it is for improving the river. So having that catalyst and the Urban Waters Federal Partnership helped greatly in that, but having that federal money come in as a catalyst has really helped that public-private partnership.
And Wendy spearheaded the team that has worked on that particular grant, and there are many subsets of public and private sector individuals who are involved in different kinds of work groups, and one of them is a grant work group, and they includes a city staff who work on writing grants for the city, working with Wendy and others, looking for grant opportunities, and who's the best applicant? Is it the city? Is it someone else? This group meets, all these different representatives meet every Friday for 90 minutes, including the city, and this has been going on for how many years? We've come to call ourselves the Order of the Sturgeon. You may see some people on their bumper stickers or their laptops have a little sturgeon sticker. That means they go to the UTS meetings. And I wanted to acknowledge Jay Steffen from the City of Grand Rapids and Matt Chapman from Grand Rapids Whitewater. If 2 of you could stand. So they co-chair this group. Again, public-private partnership, not just in name, not just occasionally, but with several work groups and an overall coordinating group meeting every week at John and Wendy's place at Grand Valley Metro Council. They're right on the river, so it's a great place to meet. Part of what Wendy referred to, that Farm Bill grant, and Chris talked about good politics and challenging politics, and that grant is an example of good politics. Senator Stabenow from Michigan, who formerly chaired the Senate Agriculture Committee and wrote the last Farm Bill, and whose idea the Regional Conservation Partnership Program has been one of the earliest and most stalwart champions for this project. And whenever there have been issues with some of the federal agencies, she's happy to ask for a briefing and have federal representatives come in and talk about the project. She's been here many times. So it illustrates some of the political support the project has had. As I mentioned a couple of times already, the business leadership has been extraordinary here. And when a delegation first went to Washington, Rebecca Water is here. She was serving in the Obama administration at the time. She's one of the first people we went to see to talk about this Urban Rivers Federal Partnership Program, and they really didn't know what to do with us because so many of the sites were led by federal agencies who were trying to cultivate private sector support. And this particular project originated with and has been championed by the private sector all along the way. And as I said in the introductions, beginning with and continuing with Founders Brewing. So I wanted to ask John, just tell us about your view of the business case for clean water, for access to recreational opportunities. Why do you, as the CEO of Founders Brewing, why do you care about this, and why does Founders care?
That's a great question. First of all, I want to take you back to the first time we heard about this project. And Chris, it wasn't one beer; it was many beers that we had. And I think the mayor can confirm all great ideas happen over beer. So we were sitting in the tap room, and Chris and Chip came in and said, "Hey, we got this great idea. You know the rapids in the Grand River that we're named after? Well, they don't exist, and we need to do something about that." And I remember sitting there with my partner Mike Stevens saying, "He's right. In fact, I don't think I've even ever stepped foot in the Grand River, and we need to do something." So we committed to a $20,000 study. And of course, continue to drink beer and talk about all the great things that we were going to do in the river. I think we had a zip line coming across the river at one point. But then the next day, we sobered up and realized, well, we don't have 20 grand. How are we going to fund this? So we figured it out. We said, well, I guess we got to really get all in and make this work. So since that time, on an annual basis, we release a beer that goes out into the market that offers attention to the Whitewater project. I'm really excited to say we had our first event this past year on the river called Tribute on the Grand, and incredibly raised $200,000 for the project as a first-year event. So super excited about that. So, all great things, are dreams, and I think that's really the fundamental basis of our business. I mean, our business was started by a couple home brewers that wanted to make beer, and never imagined we would scale it to this level. And we looked at what Chris and Chip had envisioned and said, this is really cool, we want to be part of this. And there's so many reasons, really. There's not one answer as to why we got involved. Aside from what you hear about the economic impact, the positive impact on our community in general, I think for us it was a way for us to continue to be engaged in our community. We have 450 employees right now, and we do the Grand River cleanup every year. I talked about the tribute on the Grand event. Every time we sell a rare beer, KBS being one of them, we take the ticket. It's still insane that people actually buy tickets to buy beer, but we take the proceeds from buying the tickets to buy the beer, and we give that to Whitewater. And our employees really engage and get involved in the river, and it's just been an incredible opportunity to serve. I think this crazy idea, it's going to happen, and I tell people that all the time. Sure, it's going to take time, and it's taken longer, I think, than we all would like, but it's going to happen. And we have an incredible amount of support from the leadership within our community, from Mayor Bliss all the way to the foundations, the philanthropists, the city, the state, the county, and the federal government. And it will happen. and it will be highly impactful. And I think that's what gets us as a company excited. It will bring more people to West Michigan. It'll bring more people along the riverfront. And as somebody who's grown up and spent my whole life in Grand Rapids, you know, the river just wasn't anything you ever went down and saw, except when the salmon were running. That was kind of cool on the fish ladder. But there really wasn't any reason to get in the river or go down to the river. And I think I know we're gonna change that. We need to get people in the river, enjoying what the asset in everything that it brings to our community. And for us as a company, it's in line with our mission, which is, you know, again, to no regrets, dream big, and go for it. And this project is really exciting and one that we're excited to be part of.
Thank you, John. John personally embodies that commitment as well. I failed to mention he is a board member of Grand Rapids Whitewater, so he's providing, in his own time and leadership, supporting the project as well. I wanted to ask Chris to reflect a little bit on riding this tiger of this vision that gains so much community support, and from an organizational point of view. So started out with a small all-volunteer organization. Matt Chapman is now full-time staff, does an extraordinary job. But as the project has grown and others have involved, what have been some of the organizational challenges that Whitewater's had to meet along the way in order to keep it going and develop the capacity to do the technical work, the permitting work? I mean, can you say a little bit about that organizational evolution?
Yeah, and I'll probably, this is a good time to talk about my partner Chip in this. He and I were mountain biking buddies before all of this happened. And one of the amazing things is when I was down in the process of the time that was spent, he was always up. And when he was down, I was up. So we really balanced each other out. And I think as two volunteers who were sacrificing time away from family and other obligations, it was a really important dynamic to where we talk about how horrible it would be if we actually didn't like each other. So we actually have quite a bit of fun doing this, and I know folks around can attest to that. Maybe too much fun on occasion, but so you know what we did is we needed a great team. We interviewed engineers from all over the country. We selected a firm that really embodied restoration. And there's not a lot of folks that can do that. So Jason Carey from River Restoration was really the pivotal first step for our process. And then in that, we had a great board. And that board of directors were also volunteers. And so, you know, paying note to all these people that are just coming, supporting, and gathering around. And really, as we ventured on and an obstacle was thrown in front of us, we were able to really handle it by just adding more people to the fold. And, you know, people, came when it was needed. And that's the amazing thing is that, you know, the whole saying of it takes a village, and that's really happened with this project. And it's all been volunteers. I mean, I am the worst at Friday afternoon meetings, but there are a lot of people that are a lot better than I am. But those are important because it's consistency and it's a way to bring all of these people together. And I think as we get into the implementation stage with our team, you know, we're going on another step of hiring someone to run this that will get paid to do this job. And so I think that's probably the next advent for us.
Thank you, Chris. John talked about growing up in Grand Rapids and not thinking of the river. I grew up here, didn't think much of the river growing up as well. This is a city that turned its back on the river, but it's easy to take for granted the fact that we can face the river and think about enjoying the river is because the river is being cleaned up. And especially at a time when fundamental Clean Water Act protections are under assault, it's really important to acknowledge that if that river weren't clean, we wouldn't be talking about it. So I wanted to ask the mayor to talk a bit about this because just a month or two ago on the Gillette Bridge, the The mayor and Mayor Hartwell was there and others celebrated the completion of the 100% separation of storm and sanitary sewers by the city of Grand Rapids, nearly $400 million. So a city of 185,000 people spending almost $400 million over several decades on it. So I wanted to ask the mayor to, talk about that, and also if you could talk a little bit about the interplay with flooding issues and Federal Emergency Management Association, which has also been a key player, and there are additional city investments in enhancing flood protection. Can you talk a bit about that?
I will. But first, before I talk about that, I just want to, Mark is so fantastic, and he talks about the greatness of all of our partners, but I want to take a moment to say how amazing Mark is. Truly, he has been a part of this process really since its inception, and his expertise on federal issues and state issues, but also his connections to the philanthropic community, his incredible wisdom has helped really move this project along, and he has been instrumental in this process, and he's very humble, and I just want to make sure that I publicly say thank you to him for all of his work in getting us to where we are today.
Thank you.
So there are many things that we're proud of in this city, and one of the things that we're incredibly proud of is all the work we've done around environmental sustainability, and we're incredibly proud to be one of the greenest mid-sized cities in this country. And that really predates my leadership as mayor. I give a lot of credit to my predecessor, Mayor Hartwell, the commissioners that served with us on the commission, who are willing to invest hundreds of millions of dollars into cleaning up our river and separating our sewer system, and the mayor that came before Mayor Hartwell. I mean, this is a legacy that really spans over the course of over 20 years, almost 30 years. And it was a commitment. It was a commitment by people who care deeply about the community, but also about the environment. And so I'm grateful for all the work that was done before my time as mayor, and was incredibly honored to stand on the bridge with so many people who worked so hard to make the sewer separation project happen in this city. And our river, you're right, our river would not be what it is today. It wouldn't be as clean as it is today if we did not invest that time and energy and money into the separation project. In fact, a lot of people, when this idea first came, and I feel like my job, a significant part of my job, is to create a platform in our city where great ideas can actually come to fruition, and then to support, I always call them co-creators or spark plugs in our city. My job is to support them to make their vision come to reality. And early when this idea came forward, there was actually people in our city who were making it very clear to me and to others that there was no way we could do this project because the river was highly contaminated and polluted. And that we would cause significant damage, and there were quite a few naysayers actually, and it was through the studies that we did and the environmental studies that we found that was actually not true. And I believe that it was because of the incredible work that was done through separating the sewer. We used to discharge a lot of waste into our river, and now we don't discharge any, virtually zero. And so I know, it's amazing. It's amazing. Yeah. Few other cities can make that claim. I believe it's one of our greatest environmental successes in our city. And then, of course, you all know with a river running through your city, you always have to be concerned about flooding. So we work, I would say in partnership with FEMA, but I think that's putting it nicely. We work with FEMA because we have to. And we have to be thinking about of course we want to think about flood protection. And we have a great team in our environmental services that does that. But of course we have flood walls that we have to maintain. And for a very long time, as we've turned our back on the river, those flood walls have been these very large concrete walls, and not very creative, and have actually created a barrier to the river. And so we're in the process of really rethinking how do we have flood protection and redevelop, we call them opportunity sites along the river. How do we redevelop those flood walls in a way that actually allows us to connect with and touch the river? And, today we're in a great place today because we have examples from other cities, we have creative designers, we have innovative engineers who can think differently about what that looks like. And you can do it differently. You can use green infrastructure and you can tier it and you can create more natural barriers. You can create barriers that can go up during flooding season. So we're really trying to take this opportunity as we look at these sites along the river the flood walls along the river that we have to redevelop to meet FEMA standards. We're trying to think about how we redevelop those very differently in alliance with this larger vision we have around restoring the rapids. So again, there's a lot of coordination and a lot of synergy between the two, but I see this as an incredible opportunity to do both and to do both really well in a creative, thoughtful way.
Thank you, Mayor. Wendy, I want to ask you to talk a little bit about some of the youth outreach educational opportunities. Wendy and Matt and others have been working with the Grand Rapids Public School System, in the context of this project of how does restoring a river present learning opportunities and also opportunities for including youth of color and ways in which to instill conservation stewardship in the next generation. Could you just say a few words about what's been done and some of the hopes around that kind of environmental education piece?
Sure, that's one of the things with this project, because this is a transformational project for the city. And students right now can be a part of that, and then when their grandkids are around, they can say, I helped do that. We really want them to be involved and to understand the whole process. So there are some programs right now within Grand Rapids Public Schools. So in 1st and 3rd grade, they go out to Blanford Nature Center. In 4th grade, they go to the lake. And then in 6th grade, they all go out in a stream and do a Teach for the Watershed, which is looking for bugs and understanding microinvertebrates. But they haven't really been connected. These are sort of once-a-year things that the students do to get outside. So we really saw this as an opportunity to get a cohesive program that would build on, sort of the new science standards that are being adopted and integrated into the whole curriculum for Grand Rapids Public Schools. So we've been working with the curriculum directors and superintendent to create that curriculum of environmental education that really is essential for the whole science curriculum to be meaningful for the kids and to be able to get them outside. So we're looking at, right now, next fall, rolling out a pilot project for 7th graders. Just because that was kind of a gap, and we thought that was a good age to start with. But what are the issues of the river that at this point they could be engaged in? And so one of the issues is endangered species. We have the snuffbox mussel. And so what we're trying to do is create, so the school is in charge of doing that curriculum and writing the lessons plans around that for the teachers. But they look to us for what's the project? What can the kids actually do? And so with endangered species, right now we're in the middle of writing the habitat conservation plan. But if you didn't know, Grand Rapids also used to be the clam capital of the world. We have lots and lots of mussels and clams in the river, and they used to harvest them and punch buttons out of their shells, so we had button factories here, but they were over-harvested. So one of the things, but there's still a very healthy population now, but how can students relate to an endangered species? And so some of it is, what are those social, environmental factors that led to them becoming endangered? And how does that relate to your life now? Do you feel any of those stresses? Do you feel sometimes like that? We also have to collect maybe about close to 100,000 of them and remove them, take them to another location and keep them alive for 3 years and put them back after the construction happens. So we probably need a lot of volunteers to be able to collect those. But it's just having them be involved in something that's very specific to this river and seeing how they can relate it to themselves.
Another aspect of this discussion has been not just learning in the classroom, not just experiential learning, but in an urban setting with significant youth of color population, what sort of job opportunities, what sort of career pathway opportunities are there? I know Dennis Chestnut's here, kind of being inspired by Dennis. That's been part of the conversation here. And Joe, I wanted to ask you, if you take sort of an equity lens to this big environmental engineering construction project, how do you think about the job creation, the career path, eye-opening potential of a project like this?
Yeah, I mentioned earlier the African proverb of wealth is water, and it's one thing to engage historically marginalized communities in the work of really voicing what they would like to see the river become, but even beyond that, it is the opportunity to create wealth by way of the water. And so one thing that we all know is that it's going to take significant resources to restore the rapids. And so the question becomes, how can communities of color, in particular entrepreneurs, business owners who are of color, how can they take advantage of opportunities that are presented around the restoration of the rapids? And so part of my vision is to make sure that we are on top of things with regards to engaging the business community, so that not only can they be present to bid on these opportunities, but I even want to see a very intentional effort in which we are signifying that we want to make sure that X amount of, or X percentage is provided in terms of the business opportunities. X percentage of dollars would be committed to spending with businesses owned by people of color, because again, there are significant opportunities, and I believe that it's both wet and dry, right? And so you have a number of companies within the Grand Rapids and West Michigan, again, owned by people of color, who probably wouldn't think of the river restoration as an economic opportunity. And this goes back to the importance of trying to not just engage, but to inform, and while simultaneously making sure that all of the parties involved, all of those who are providing the governance structure, to help them understand as well the importance of this, what this says, not just to our community, but what this says to the rest of the country in terms of how you do this. If it's one thing I could say about our beloved Grand Rapids, is we like to model. There's something about being the first. There's something about being able to say, we're doing it here, and we may not have gotten it all right, but we are pretty confident that how we've done things here could very much be emulated throughout the country. And so I look at this as a great example, because it is an opportunity not just for the generation of now, but future generations to be able to tap into opportunities to make sure that, again, that as we restore the rapids, that we do a bang-up job of making sure that we are maintaining that investment. And so I'm excited about the job opportunities, the economic opportunities that will come by way of restoring the rapids.
One of the wonderful things about River Rally is the opportunity to model projects, but also to learn from each other. And that has been a key part of this, and I wanted to acknowledge Barbara Nelson Jameson of the National Park Services here. They have been a key federal partner as we thought about how do you organize the structuring, the governance of this that would integrate what happens along the banks, the dry, with the river restoration, the wet, that through Barbara's knowledge and connections, we are able to learn from Cleveland and Pittsburgh and many places where the National Park Service has played that role. And in the spirit of that learning from each other, I want to open it up at this point for questions you have for any of the panelists, or any observations you have based on projects and river restoration efforts that you've been involved in that you think might help us understand the challenges and ways in which to meet them. So who's got the first question or comment? Yes, right here in the front.
When y'all rebuild the rapids, are you going to use natural stone or concrete features? They did that a lot on the Ocoee River in Tennessee. Some of the concrete has begun to wear down. I was just curious if you're going to be using natural stone or if you're going to manufacture artificial stone.
So So the question is about the nature of the materials and kind of the concrete whitewater play park versus more naturalized rapids, and I'll let Chris take a shot at that.
We had one of the engineers that we interviewed that said we have these wonderful concrete blocks that create great hydraulics, and we thought, well, I think we have enough concrete in our river. So the goal is really to use naturalized stone as much as we can. I think there's some areas that we might have to be creative, but in general, we'd love to use natural stone. There is a unique part of Michigan's not full of a lot of stone. So where do you get it from? And we're starting to get into that topic right now.
One aspect of the project that I think is relevant is it's a 2.5-mile stretch of river. The upper half of the project is take out the dam and reveal the remaining rapids that have been drowned out. And then the lower half is bringing in natural stone and materials to replace what was excavated. So it's a reveal and restore sort of process. So, and that was part of the discovery, thanks to Grand Rapids Whitewater. People didn't realize that the old bedrock limestone rapids, that about half of it was still there. It was just drowned out by the dam. Other questions or comments? Yes, ma'am, up here. And Joe, could you summarize the question as you answer it, or Wendy, whomever?
Okay. She asked about water is wealth, but what about water is health? And the opportunity for students to learn how to swim, about boating, being comfortable in the water. So Grand Rapids used to have, and it's a terrible name, they used to have swimming lessons and they called it drown proofing. I've never understood. It was a long time ago. Terrible name. But that they eliminated that program, as many programs throughout the years have been eliminated. So, but Mark just informed me we have a new director of our Y in town that is really wanting to connect this river restoration with providing those swimming lessons and getting students comfortable in the water. And I think they talk about the economic opportunities too. I mean, right now up and down the river there aren't many liveries. There aren't areas where you can really rent boats and get in and out and do that, mainly because it's dangerous in there. Those dams are very dangerous. So we are hoping to see that those liveries come, and that's part of the student experience to get out there. And with the city's river walks, maybe some of you have been able to experience both east and west side river walks, but they're being reimagined, and we really see that as being walking paths and being part of the health experience in Grand Rapids, being able to walk places, being able to bike places. We have 75 miles of bike lanes now. You see many, many more people on bikes, getting to work and using that as a healthy option. So we do hope to see that.
Great. Joe, you want to add anything?
No, just that, to your point, that's Scott Lewis, who heads up the YMCA of Greater Grand Rapids. And again, Scott is, he's an implant into Grand Rapids, and just love the idea, the creativity, the thought of, trying to engage young people, because, again, historically, the lack of effort or the lack of learning how to swim, especially if you're coming from the urban center. And I know that what you can expect, or what we're expecting, is really to try to tap as many existing organizations and entities to try to get as many people as possible to the water, and again, and be able to kind of lay out every single opportunity that exists to take advantage. And again, for some, it is jogging up and down the river walk. It is rowing. It is canoeing. It is swimming. But again, to Scott's credit, I think he recognizes, why not try to find opportunities where we can have kids swimming in the summertime outside, but recognizing that he has the facilities, of course, during the winter months. So,
thank you. So, ma'am, you had a question here, and then David. So both of you can ask them, and then we'll turn them to the panel.
Thank you very much for your presentation, and I'm very impressed with the quality of the public and private partnerships and the way we work together. Our work in Water Legacy is mostly about preventing some incredibly destructive, polluting developments. And I'm wondering if you have any lessons that seem of how anyone has been able to create a public-private partnership of similar resources and strength when we have on the other side of us a very live, powerful, active industry that is promising all kinds of jobs and has the ear of most of the government powers.
And David, did you state your question, and then we'll turn them both to the panel.
Yeah, actually, it's not a question. I just want to tell you a quick story. I landed at Gerald Ford Airport. I know nothing about Grand Rapids or how to get here from the airport or whatever. I go to the information booth. I ask, how do I get here? They say, why are you going there? I said, river route. They said, oh, are you going to talk about our river restoration project? And I then spent 5 minutes talking with 2 women, volunteers at the information desk at Gerald Ford Airport about your project. Whoever's doing your outreach, your project.
So, thank you. I'm going to ask John and Chris to respond, and John to respond as a business leader. And in Grand Rapids, in this area, is historically a manufacturing-based economy, and about the business interest again in clean water, and how do you foster business development that advances clean water. And then I'm going to ask Chris to talk about the communication challenge, because I think a lot of people locally are sort of, why haven't they finished that project yet? Where are they? And so Chris to talk a little bit about managing public expectations with a project like this. So, John?
So, would you like me to address her question then?
Yes.
Okay. I mean, I think, from a business standpoint, we've done a good job in our community of working together and being open and honest and transparent about the challenges that we have. I think that's, frankly, that's been the key driver for us. For instance, we had some issues that the mayor and the city have helped businesses with as it relates to our wastewater, and really being forthright and coming together as with a number of other companies that had similar concerns. We were able to put together solutions that really did help the businesses. But I think, when you decide to open a business or run a business in downtown Grand Rapids, you realize there are going to be some challenges. There's I think for us, for our business, it was the right decision. We very easily could have moved out, far outside of Grand Rapids and had a lot more land and made our production team a lot happier, where, we basically are brewing, 500,000 barrels of beer on one city block in downtown Grand Rapids. So it does present a lot of challenges for us, and, we as a company are committed to the impact that we have on the environment. We actually have a committee that focuses 100% on limiting the impact that we have and coming up with new creative ideas on how to improve our position in that area. So I think Grand Rapids is unique in that we have really good conversations around it. We are sensitive to it, and hopefully that addresses your question.
Great. Thank you. Chris, the communications, managing expectations, I was going to turn it to you, Mayor, for the last word, right after Chris, and then we'll wind it up.
So it's wonderful to hear that that we are doing some of it correctly, although I don't think we've done a great job. And I think the challenge as we've gone along as a group is we've had our head down and we've been working really hard, and it's been really difficult to be intentional about telling everyone about what life is like in the weeds. Because the project is so complicated, there are not many people that really understand the path and the meandering that we've had to go through in order to get where we are today. But it's something that is always, something that we can try to do better. And I think as we get into the implementation stage, it'll be a lot easier. But I think that's been a challenge for us, just to, be able to bring people along the path that we've taken.
Thank you. And we'll round out this morning's panel with final comments from Mayor Bliss.
Thank you. I want to add to John's answer. the private sector in our community really are leaders on environmental sustainability. So in the city of Grand Rapids, we have a 2030 district. We have private businesses who are committed to reducing their energy use and being more environmentally sustainable. We have the most B corporations in the entire state right here in our own community. We have companies that are absolutely committed to the triple bottom line. We have the most LEED certified buildings. So this Grand Rapids, there really is a culture of commitment to environmental sustainability. And John's being really humble. We're in the process at the city of building a biodigester at our wastewater treatment facility, and we're using waste directly from Founders and other manufacturers here in town. And so we're able to build a biodigester and create methane that we will then use for energy to energize our wastewater treatment facility to help us get to our goal of 100% renewable energy in the city. And so again, this partnership with private sector is so key to the work that we do in this city, but it is absolutely key to not only the idea of restoring our rapids, but actually making it come to fruition. And so I just want to say thank you to everyone up here, but also what an honor it is to be a part of this incredible team.
So I wanted to close by mentioning along those lines that the Downtown Development Authority, known as Downtown Grand Rapids, Inc., was also, along with Founders, one of the earliest financial supporters of Grand Rapids Whitewater, using some of their tax increment financing money, and has been a key leader as well. Two final facts just as we leave. So doing the river restoration, what we call the wet part, it's a $35 million project. 10 million committed so far, 5 public, 5 private. So that's where things are on the fundraising side. And I wanted to thank River Network for putting together this panel. Thank Nicole and her staff and board for choosing to come to Grand Rapids. Thank all of you for being here this morning, and will you please join me in a round of applause to thank our panelists.